listening uh, is done every week, but in English, the last Tuesday of every month. Uh, I started this about 3 or 4 years ago and decided very recently to at least once a month conduct this online talk at least one day out of the month. I don't know how many people out there are listening. I hope you're listening. I hope you find it beneficial, and I plan on continuing this. Your comments are certainly welcome. The purpose of this is to bring the myriad of topics and the myriad of takes on different subjects in line with a scientific perspective, meaning not just what to do and how to do it, but why you should do it in a certain way. And primarily it has to do with exercise. So the assumption is that the people who might be listening exercise on a regular basis and would be well served to understand more in more detail exactly what's going on when they do perform aerobic exercise and stretching, muscular conditioning. I've been in Japan for 52 years and almost entirely involved in the fitness industry, all aspects of it, building places, running places. But basically the core of what I do is teach exercise. So without further ado, let me get to the topic tonight, which is thermoregulation. It is now the end of May. We're getting into the rainy season, so it's still relatively cool, although the humidity is high. But come July, August, and the first part of September, it's going to become very, very warm. And the humidity is going to be at least as high as it is now, if not higher. So how do we deal with that? So let's start with how does the body regulate temperature? Well, what happens is that the blood is heated, and it's heated close to the skeletal structure. And then to facilitate cooling off that superheated blood, the body raises blood pressure and pushes that blood to the surface near the skin. And then the skin pores open a bit, sweat is secreted, and when that sweat evaporates, then the cooling effect on the blood is facilitated, and then it's returned back to where it began. So that's basically circulatory response. So that's what happens. The problem is not necessarily the heat per se, it's the humidity. If the humidity is so high that it prevents your sweat from evaporating, then the body, primarily the hypothalamus, the brain decides that you need to have more blood sent to the surface of the skin. You need to sweat more. But what's happening is the sweat is not evaporating, so cooling does not take place. Well, if that continues for a prolonged period of time, pretty soon the body suffers a serious distress. Passing out is one part of it. If your blood pressure goes too high, you have more serious consequences. So the idea is, how do you stay cool in that situation? Well, if you're outside, clothing is a good idea, particularly the head. You lose about 20% of the heat through the head, but you also absorb a great deal of the brain gets superheated, and can have some problems. And particularly the hypothalamus, which is located just at the back of the base of the skull. And the hypothalamus controls blood pressure, it controls sweating, and it responds to the heat that the body is experiencing. So, you exercise in the heat, you get overheated, the blood gets shunted to the surface, just below the surface of the skin, sweat evaporates, the blood cools, everything's fine. But if the sweat doesn't evaporate, the process continues on and on and on, and pretty soon you're in trouble. Drinking water, hydration has been around for a long time. In Japan, relatively recent, the last, I would say, 10 years. But before that, it was prohibited to drink water, especially for athletes, because it would disturb their concentration. Fortunately, they've dispensed with that idea, and now athletes drink water just like the rest of us. So, water is the key. Now, nutritionists suggest that we have 2.5 liters of liquid a day. So, which liquid should we choose? It has been shown through studies that if you compare, for example, water to sports drinks, how does that absorption take place, and which is more efficient? It's what they call gastric emptying. So how quickly does the water, once you consume it, how does it just get out of the stomach and into the area where it's necessary to assist in cooling the body? So water seems to be the best. Cold water, ice water, facilitates gastric emptying and facilitates cooling the body and keeping the body hydrated with sufficient water. If you don't do that, the burden on the kidneys, internal function becomes serious, and then you enter various different stages of distress. It's not death. The consequences are not death, but you've seen people that pass out from the heat prostration, and that's primarily because, number one, they're not drinking water in the first place, or number two, their body is not conditioned to deal with the heat. So, let me diverse somewhat. Drinking water is sufficient, but when you're in an overheated state, it's not enough. So I would suggest that if you achieve that, if you feel it's a little bit woozy, a little bit dizzy, and you're out in the heat, get out of the heat first, and then put something cold on the base of your skull, where the hypothalamus is, and that will immediately drop your blood pressure, and you immediately feel better. And then rest, get out of the heat, and go someplace and just simply cool off. So that's a simple solution to a difficult situation. How you should dress in the heat: something that is not form-fitting, allows wind to come through the clothing and to assist in evaporation of sweat, which assists in the cooling process. So that's what happens. That's what happens. So how do you facilitate that? When you are exercising inside, it's not a problem. Obviously, the environment is temperature controlled and humidity controlled. The American College of Sports Medicine has established the guidelines for exercise in the heat and humidity, and I doubt if this happens inside, but if the temperature is over 30 degrees centigrade and the humidity is over 65%, it is advised that you cease exercise. Do not exercise. It doesn't matter if you're in a swimming pool, it doesn't matter. If the heat is 30 degrees and 65%, stop. That's the safest procedure. And to do so, you proceed at your own risk. And that's the statistic. So be cautious in that regard. If it becomes that hot and that humid, yes, drinking water will prevent perhaps an onslaught of heat exhaustion, and cooling the hypothalamus will assist, but you'll still feel very, very uncomfortable. So be aware of this. When you are exercising, if the temperature is normal, the three major aspects of fitness exercise that we are now, almost everybody is involved in, are basically aerobic exercise, resistance training, and flexibility. The temperature range for each one of those pursuits, the aerobic exercise is around 22 degrees centigrade, 20 to 22. It's cool. It's cool. Because the body is creating a great deal of heat with the exertion involved in aerobic exercise. That's a given. Weight training, since it's not as constant as aerobic exercises, and you rest periods between sets, the temperature requirement, or the temperature ideal, is around 26 degrees centigrade. It's not too warm, it's not too cool. A certain amount of warmth promotes the production of growth hormones, so it will assist in your objective of increasing your muscular mass and perhaps even your contractile capacity or strength. When you're involved in stretching, yoga is one primary, a very, very good stretching exercise regimen. 30 degrees is fine. Lately, certainly in Japan, they have what they call hot yoga classes. And essentially it's like exercising in a sauna. I have some serious trouble with that. It's true that you're not moving a great deal, that you're assuming different poses and you're stretching, and a warm environment will facilitate that. But not too warm, not too warm. There are stresses that you impose on the body when you do any kind of exercise. Stretching is one of them. So it's not as bad, it's not as intense as your aerobic exercise regimen, nor is it intense as your weight training, but it's still there. So you should be cautious. Drink plenty of water, and if you feel bad, simply stop. It's that easy. If you have trouble cooling down, obviously bathing, cold showers, swimming pools, cold plunges are a wonderful alternative. Unfortunately, not all places have these. Especially in the hot yoga, they're just a studio. Many of these studios do not have shower facilities, not bathing facilities. So there's no way to cool down except go into a cool place. Or, again, get something cold, an ice pack, and put it on the back of the base of your skull, the hypothalamus, and that will bring your body temperature down. So that's one idea that I think you should keep in mind if you're ever feeling bad from overexertion, especially in the heat. So, let's take you from a gym environment where the temperature and the humidity is controlled, and outside in the normal environment. If there is a difference of only 3 degrees centigrade between the internal temperature inside the building and outside, the body has difficulty adjusting to that. So how do you compensate for that? It is now May, and it is still relatively cool. If you plan on competing or participating in an event outside, now is the time to begin the adaptation process. If you can exercise now on a regular basis, not extreme, but 10 or 15 minutes of outside walking, what will happen is your capillary beds will develop, and the more capillary beds, the more pathways you have for the blood to flow, the more the body will, the compensatory mechanisms to deal with heat will develop. To develop capillary beds, normally it is about 60% of your age-related maximum heart rate. I believe I talked about this in a prior session about aerobic conditioning, but let me review. 220 heartbeats per minute is the maximum the human body can tolerate without entering into a distress situation. Distress situation means basically your heart enters what they call a fibrillative state. The possibility, so it's not absolute, doesn't happen to everybody. The more conditioned you are, the more you can safely achieve that and not have any serious difficulties. But for most of us, 200 beats per minute is the maximum that we can attain. And that's not the maximum you can attain, the maximum the maximum possibility. For your age-related maximum heart rate, you subtract your age from that figure. So if you're 20 years old, your maximum heart rate is not 220 heartbeats per minute, it is 200 heartbeats per minute. That's your maximum heart rate. If you exceed that, 200 beats per minute, not 220, 200 beats a minute, a 20-year-old will run the risk of their heart entering a fibrillative state. And when that happens, essentially your heart muscle spasms. And if you're not attended to very quickly, you will suffer serious consequences. Death among them, paralysis of sorts. It's something you do not want to even entertain. However, that being said, I have worked with athletes who achieve that with no problems whatsoever. But for the average person, 200 minus your age is the maximum you can achieve without serious consequences. So, but that doesn't mean you should do that on a regular basis. You take a percentage of your age-related maximum heart rate and conduct your exercise program within that percentage. So for a minimum effect, I'll stress it gets confusing, so I'll say it again. 220 minus your age, that figure times 60%. So if take the 20-year-old for example, 220 beats per minute. 20-year-old's maximum heart rate is 200. 60% of that is 120 beats per minute. While he is doing aerobic exercise, or for that matter, any exercise, 120 beats per minute is the minimum level he should attempt to achieve for a training effect. For a training effect. Now you can exercise at a lower level and you won't get a training effect. You'll still have some benefit, but it won't be scientific. It'll be haphazard. So it's like going for a walk in the park. Obviously your heart rate doesn't go up quite that high, but it's still pleasant to walk in the park. There are still emotional advantages that you achieve, but not physiological benefits. 60% is established as the minimum for a training effect. So what changes? It's 60% of your age-related maximum heart rate. Blood vessels increase, and red blood cells tend to increase over time. So you can't do it for 5 minutes, but if you do it for 20 or 30 minutes, 3 times a week, which is more or less recommended, you will have some training effect. Obviously, the more often you do it, and the longer you do it, the more training effect you obtain. But that's a given. But there is a limit, and the limit is where does risk enter the situation. So, as I've said on this broadcast before, efficient, effective, and safe exercise are the 3 things you should keep in mind, as well as a factor of continuing. So people train at a higher intensity, but they don't keep it up. They don't adopt it as a lifestyle. They do it for a while, they stop. So those are the 4 parameters I think you should keep in mind. So 60%, you get red blood cell enhancement, and you get capillary beds enhanced over time. It's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day. This, interesting enough, is what people who have stage 2, type 2 diabetes, and high blood pressure. Even at 60%, your blood pressure rises somewhat, but it's not severe, so it shouldn't be a problem. 70%, you get more of that effect. More red blood cell enhancement, more oxygen utilization capacity improves, and capillary beds also improve. And that's kind of a baseline. It's where I think most people should, I feel, if they're going to embark on a fitness program, especially in the aerobics portion, that is certainly an attainable goal, and it's not particularly burdensome. It's not difficult to do that. To do it on a regular basis, that's another story. So 60-70% is fine for most of us. If you are involved in something that requires more aerobic capacity, for example, thinking of entering a marathon, 5, 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, full marathon, then you have to exercise at a higher intensity. 70% is simply not sufficient. So then you go into the 75, 80% percentile range. But that's not for the beginner, not at all. As a matter of fact, for a very beginning beginner, you shouldn't even worry about this at all. What you should be concerned about is getting to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, and even if you just go and 5 minutes on the bicycle and do a couple of machines and then leave and take a shower and feel better because of it, that's sufficient. Creating the habit and then continuing to do that. So, the obvious point that should be taken away from this is that the more intense your workout and the longer your workout, the longer your body temperature will rise. And it will be cooling of the body will be governed by blood pressure. So the hotter you are, and if your sweat does not evaporate because the humidity is too high, then your blood pressure continues to rise, and that can be serious. It's the same effect with people who have a great deal of adipose tissue. So we're not talking about people with a large stomach. That's obvious. So, but there are also people with a coating of fat. Women tend to be have a higher percentage of body fat. It's just, let's face it, that's just the way women and men are built. Hormonal structure is given that women will carry more fat percentage. The guidelines for obesity, or the lack of obesity, is the range is for men between 15 and 22% body fat, plus or minus 3%, and for women 18 to 25 percentage body fat, plus or minus 3%. So women in general will carry more adipose tissue. The problem with that is it interferes with the thermoregulation process. It's kind of like if you have fatty tissue around your arms and legs, not just around your stomach, then even if your sweat does evaporate and the cooling process takes place, it doesn't get to the blood because the fat interferes with that process. So, one of the ways you can improve and increase the adaptive process is, as I said, start now. Start walking on a regular basis, 20 or 30 minutes a week, and that will build your capillary beds, and that will build your red blood cells. But your capillary beds are important because that will help you dispense with the heat, and it will reduce your body fat. So the adaptive process will begin now when it's not too hot, and as it gets warmer, that adaptive process will improve. So when summer really hits, in August and July and August, and humidity is very high, you will have a better chance of getting through exercising outside safely. It's that simple. So that's what thermoregulation is all about. So what are the points you have to keep in mind? You should prepare if you're going to do something beyond exercising inside in a gym. Excuse me. I have a friend here who has a built-in coat that she needs to take off during summer. This is my, I don't know what she is. She's not my pet. I think I'm her pet. But this is May. And so, just like a cat who sheds their fur during the hot weather, we don't have fur, but we do have body fat. And the more you can shed, the more efficient your body will cool when it's really necessary. The more efficient the thermoregulatory process takes place. So keep that in mind. So start now. Walk 2 or 3 times a week, if possible. Doesn't have to be long, 10, 15 minutes. You should feel better after the walk than before. If you're not going to do anything outside, for example, around October, November in Japan, there are a series of marathons. Kawaguchiko Marathon, Yamanako Marathon, Ome Marathon, and if you're really aggressively involved in aerobic exercise, there's always the Honolulu Marathon on the second Sunday of every December. HH, konbanwa. Everybody's got typhoon number 2 on their minds. If you're going to train seriously for a marathon, which is the primary pursuit where people run into thermoregulatory problems all the time, give yourself several months to prepare. And again, now where it's cool, the humidity is high, but it's not hot. So you shouldn't have any problem staying cool. Drink water before you start your exercise regimen, and drink water when you come back from your exercise regimen. If you are outside exercising for more than 30 minutes, you will need extra water. Just enough before you begin and after you finish is simply not sufficient. You will see, if you watch a marathon, it varies, but about every 5 kilometers, they'll have an aid station where they'll have a series of tables set out with water, cups of water that you can drink. If it's a full marathon, or say 20 kilometers more than 20 kilometers, what they will have is they have one table with water and one table with some carbonated drink without the carbonation. They'll remove the carbonation. It'll be sweet. It's almost like, it's very syrupy, but it's sugar, and that will raise your blood sugar. But that's a separate issue. And if it's really professional, they'll have sponges with cold water that you can put on your head to cool your head and your hypothalamus, which will keep your temperature under control. But that's, again, by that time, again, at the end of this year, it'll be in November, December, it won't be quite as bad because it'll be cool and the humidity will be relatively low, so you won't have that problem. The primary concern is in the next 2 or 3 months, and that's when heat really becomes serious in Japan. You have to be careful. So let's review before we get too confused over these things. You drink at least 2.5 liters of water a day. Stay hydrated. If you exercise outside, try the coolest part of the day, whether it's in the morning or in the evening. It doesn't have to be a long period of time. Just create the habit. You should feel better after your exercise outside than you did before you began. If you're exercising for more than 30 minutes, I don't see any other way than to carry the water with you. You will need more than just drinking water before you begin. But you should drink a substantial amount of water. One of the problems with that is that you get what they call side splints, because the water stays in your stomach even though gastric emptying is continuing, and you're getting the water out of your stomach and into the bloodstream where it can assist in cooling. You still the burden on the stomach sac. It pulls down the diaphragm, and the diaphragm kind of spasms. You get these side splits. But if you exercise with food or water in your gut, in your stomach, then those muscles will become stronger through exercise. Yes, I'm being paged. You'll have to excuse me for just a moment. Yes. This is my daughter, and she doesn't like to be ignored. So, So where were we? Okay. Um, the clothes that you're wearing should be loose fitting uh, and allow for air to go through the material. So heavy material is just not advised. Please do not exercise outside, or inside for that matter, in these rubberized sweatsuits. They interfere with the sweat evaporating. They interfere with cooling the body. They're an absurd method of assisting in weight loss, because you don't lose weight. As a matter of fact, what you do lose is water, because it's so warm, it profuse sweating. That's true, but that's not burning calories. Keep in mind, losing water weight, losing body fat, two different standards. So when you exercise, even running, I mean, I don't mean to go back to weight loss, but it's always the case. People run outside or run inside and they want to lose weight. And just a brief summation here. Depending on your weight, depending on your age, depending on the intensity of your workout, it will take you between 10 and 20 hours of exercise to lose 1 kilogram of body fat. That's just the science. 7,700 calories have to be burned, more than you intake, to lose 1 kilogram of body fat. It is not easy to do that with normal dietary pursuits. What you can do, if you want to lose weight, okay, don't rely on exercise alone. Aerobic exercise will help, weight training will help, it will change your body, it will increase your metabolism, all that is true. But if you do not pay attention to what you eat, it's very possible you can gain weight by exercise. And it's not good weight, it's not muscular weight, it's fatty weight. So if you burn 600 calories, which is a heck of a workout, say an hour on the treadmill at 10 kilometers per hour, you burn 600 calories, your blood sugar goes down, you want to eat something, so you eat 700 calories. So what have you got? You've got the benefit of exercising on a treadmill, all the aerobic benefits, capillary beds, blood cells, lung capacity, heart stroke volume, intravenous return. All of these things are advantages, but weight loss is the plus and minus of calories. So you get all the benefits, except you don't lose weight. That's a separate issue, and we covered that before, so I'm going to put that aside for now. Okay. So again, keep drinking water, dress lightly, run when it's, or if you're exercising outside, run when it's cool. If you're exercising inside, normally that's not a problem because temperature is controlled. It's not a problem at all. Just a tip here. If you are training for a marathon, you can't do all the training on a treadmill. It has to be done outside. It's very, very different. Running outside, running inside, different combination of muscular strength, stamina, the whole 9 yards. So in order to run a marathon, you have to run outside. And you have to run outside in a terrain that mimics the course you were planning on running. So just put that aside for a second. Okay. So while you're running, if you're running for more than 30 minutes, find somewhere you can retain, you can drink more water. Somewhere, you can stop at a water fountain. If you're in a park, if you carry the water bottle with you, which is a pain, still, 30 minutes without any hydration is not a good idea. You have to have some hydration, and you have to have something cool you can put on the back of your head if you get into heat concerns. So thermoregulation is serious. It can kill you if you don't do it right. So I hate to get dramatic about this, but it's serious stuff. So that being said, what's the next step? The other thing that if you're thinking about, again, running, aerobic activity, you don't need a lot of upper body mass. If you see marathon runners, typically their upper body is not particularly muscular. Triathlon participants, a little bit different. It's not just running. Upper body strength is required for the swimming, and they have if you watch them, you can see the upper body muscularity is a little bit more than what the marathon runner is. So what's the reason? Again, you get back to thermoregulation. If all of this upper mass has muscle is creating heat, okay? And the problem with people who are heavily muscular when they do aerobic conditioning is they can't get rid of the heat fast enough. That's the problem. So as a result, heart rates jump up, blood pressure goes sky high, and in some cases, heart failure occurs. So, from a personal viewpoint, when I ran Honolulu Marathon 5 times. Honolulu Marathon is a very warm, humid environment. And when you train here in Tokyo, in October, November, it's not warm and it's not humid. It's cool. It's very pleasant. Very pleasant. The trouble is, the adaptive process of training my muscularity to finish 42 kilometers was fine. But that was in cool weather with low humidity. Go to Hawaii and you're running the marathon and it's right away, it's much warmer and it's much more humid. So how do you get through the run? The conditioning that you do before helps, no doubt about it. But it's just not the same. You have to know what you're doing. So what I had to do was reduce upper body mass significantly. So all of the body weight that I lost, which was significant, I tried to drop about 20 kilos of upper body mass so that now the heart can fulfill its function of sending blood and nutrients and oxygen to the legs where they're needed, and they don't have to send a lot of blood to the upper body where it's not needed. But if I had a large upper body mass, my upper body mass would require that the blood also send blood to the muscles that were not involved in the actual performance of the marathon. So staying lean has several different connotations. It's not just lean in terms of low body fat. It's lean in terms of low muscularity, certainly upper body muscularity. You have to be trim, very trim. Otherwise, the burden on the heart is significant. Just that's the way it is. People told me that I would never finish a marathon. It was just impossible because size of the musculature. And that may be true. In fact, it's very true. I'm not going to get into it right now, but it has to do with nature of the muscularity. Slow twitch, fast twitch fibers, geared towards strength and power as opposed to stamina and long-term aerobic exercise. It just, physiologically, I was not geared towards running a marathon. And many people are not. But I had enough sense, and there were some very good books that indicated reduce your upper body muscle mass as well as your upper body adipose tissue. So reduce your weight, not only in fat but in muscular weight as well. And that helped significantly. So one of the things that they suggest, they being authorities who know a lot about this kind of thing, is carbohydrate intake. Now lately there's been a lot of talk about carbohydrate-free diets, or just the opposite, nothing but carbohydrates. A lot of arguments about that, primarily concerned with weight loss. I don't want to get into that, that's an entirely different issue, but what carbohydrates do is they promote the retention of fluids, whereas high protein diets are not exactly diuretic, but they will promote the dispensation of fluids. So lately there's something not exactly new, but it's in the last few years come out, the paleo diet, which is eating primarily beef. Nothing but beef, which I think is not appropriate, because vitamins, minerals, fruits, vegetables, not a good idea. But some people have taken it to an extreme. So, carbohydrates promote the retention of fluid. So, there is an idea out there that seems to have some validity, where carbohydrate loading is put forth. So the idea is that if you eat an American diet, you deplete carbohydrates for 3 days, and then you eat nothing but carbohydrates for 3 days, and then you take a rest, and then you do your marathon, and increases your performance by 10-20%. I did that, and it didn't seem to have a positive effect. I didn't do it every time, but the time that I did do it, my time for the marathon was 4.5 hours, as opposed to later on 5.5 hours. I was just happy that I finished. I did not consider myself a marathon runner, but it's nice to test your limits from time to time, and that was certainly an appropriate thing to do, especially since fitness is, the definition of fitness is VO2 max. How much oxygen you can utilize, how much oxygen you can take in. It's not what we're talking about tonight, but that's a separate issue. So, if you're concerned about thermal regulation, and you should be, and if you're living in Japan, or any place for that matter, that has a high temperature, high humidity environment, then you should take these things into consideration. Plenty of fluids. The normal recommendation of fluids is 2.5 liters of water a day. If you're exercising, obviously that's not going to be enough. And I know it's not easy. Drinking water before you do any kind of aerobic exercise is not a bad idea, as long as it's not excessive. Drinking water while you exercise is a good idea if it's available and easily achieved. A lot of places don't have, for example, if you're running outside, you're not going to find that water. You can't walk into somebody's house and ask for a glass of water. So you have to carry it with you, which can be burdensome. So, I'd like to go back just a second here. I stressed that these rubberized sweatsuits, they came from young athletes. I stress the word young here. Young athletes attempting to make a certain weight quickly, without diminishing energy. So what they would do, rather than diminish calories, which supplied the energy they needed, they would essentially dehydrate. And what the rubberized suit did was, because the body assumes that when you sweat there's going to be a cooling procedure that takes place, thermoregulation will take place, and it doesn't, then the body continues to produce more sweat and more sweat. And it's hazardous for an older person because it raises blood pressure. But for a younger person who's an athlete, like for example a boxer, they probably don't have those concerns. And obviously, so they wear a rubberized suit and they run outside, and they make their weight usually in a few days prior to the weigh-in, and then they weigh in, and then they eat and gorge and drink a lot of water to become rehydrated again prior to the actual fight, which is okay if the actual fight is an hour after your weigh-in, though. You will have very little energy left, and your dehydration will cause you to participate less efficiently. Let's put it that way. But that being said, it happens a lot. Professional athletes can get away with a lot, but we can't. We are not professional athletes. We don't have years and years of conditioning, and the body's adaptive processes have not taken place like they take place in professional athletes. And so professional athletes' bodies are extremely efficient. They can drop weight very quickly with no adverse effects, but we cannot. They can work their way through dehydration, but we cannot. They don't have to worry about thermoregulation as much as we do because their capillary beds and cardiovascular systems have been developed to compensate. So that's what you have to consider. So there you have it. So again, at the risk of repeating, drink plenty of water, wear light-fitting clothes. If you're running outside or doing anything outside, do it in the early morning or late in the evening. Try and find a place which is cool, away from traffic if possible. Okay, wear a hat. Keep your head cool. If you cannot put a cold ice pack on your neck, douse the hat on your head with water, and that will keep your head reasonably cool. If you're running for an hour and you find some place that has a faucet, just dump your head under the faucet, and that will cool it off. I practice judo twice a week. Practice, when it is a full practice, is an hour and a half. And you have, besides the warm-up, you have 4-minute matches. And judo's tough. And you're in a judo suit, so the idea with thermoregulation becomes a difficult because you have a judo suit on. So that interferes with the sweat evaporating and the body's natural cooling mechanisms. So, after every 4-minute match, I slip out for a minute. There's in the school, or in the place where we practice, there's a drinking fountain. And I have 1 sip of water, and I put the rest of the water on the back of my head. And I go back to another practice. On a good night, I'll fight 15 times for an hour and a half. That means almost constantly for an hour and a half. Most of the people there, who are younger than I am, get by with maybe 5 or 6 fights. That's the difference. That's a dramatic demonstration of taking care of how your body regulates temperature and not taking care of it. The other practitioners in the hall rarely drink water. They never put water on the back of their neck. They never cool down. And in the world of the martial arts, drinking water during practice is seen as a sign of weakness. It's insane. And it's less than it was, thankfully, now. And now at least every 15 minutes, even in high schools and universities, they allow the judo players to get a drink of water. Just to swallow, just to replace the amount of sweat they lost. And it helps. It helps. Dousing the head with water is something that they haven't quite caught, the Japanese haven't caught on to yet, really, but they're getting there. So they have learned over the years the benefits of doing this. So I hope this helps. Water is important. Cold water is absorbed more quickly. Stick with ice water if you can. Do not, well, if water is good, then sports drinks have to be better. That's just simply not true. Sports drinks are basically sugar and water. And you don't, the studies have been done that shows that you absorb the liquid, but water you absorb quicker. What you absorb quicker is the sugar. And that's okay if you're doing an aerobic-based exercise regimen, but if you're not, then your blood sugar goes up. And that can be serious. I trained some serious athletes. And one young athlete, 26, 27 years old, his resting blood sugar was like 300, which is the normal limit is 140. And I read him the riot act. I said, what are you drinking? So every practice he drank like 2 or 3 liters of sports drinks, which is just sugar. I understand that you want the sugar but you want the water first, and then have something that has less than simple sugars, so you don't raise your blood sugar off the charts. But again, that's a separate issue. So stay cool. Even if you're feeling a little bad, even if you're outside gardening and you don't happen to have a hat on and the sun is beating down on the back of your neck and you're feeling difficult or woozy, don't drink alcohol, don't drink a beer, that won't work. Alcohol promotes the evaporation of fluid. Do not do that. So go inside, put your head under the faucet, douse your head with cold water, especially your hypothalamus, and have a glass of water and rest until your blood pressure comes down and you feel better. I can only suggest that you take care of these things. Some people will feel that this is an extreme point of view, but I know people that have become very, very sick and have almost collapsed from not paying attention to these simple things, like drinking water, dousing the head with water, wearing light clothing, simple things. And being very cautious about exercising in the middle of the day when it's the hottest time of the day. Hottest time of the day is between 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't understand. Well, the reason is people don't understand this. So they think, well, it's not that much different. Noon is not that much different from 2 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Actually, it's interesting to note that early in the morning at 10 o'clock or at 2 o'clock is worse than exercising at noon. Because at noon, ostensibly, the sun is directly overhead. It comes straight down. But in the morning, in the afternoon, it comes in the side. And so your body gets superheated more than if the sun is directly overhead and you have a hat on. So it's that simple. Pay attention not to get overheated. Pay attention to water and what it can do. Pay attention that drinking water is simply not enough in many respects. You have to cool the body so that the body's natural reflex, the natural occurrences of attempting to cool the body, of raising the blood sugar, making your heart beat faster, getting more blood, doesn't result in a serious cardiovascular incident. So I think I've covered most of the points when it comes to thermoregulation. Again, indoors is not a problem, but it's going to get warm in Tokyo or in Japan. And some places are going to get very warm, so be very cautious. If you have a child and they are in a school exercise program like playing baseball in the summertime, please have them look at this and be aware of what they have to do to compensate for some feelings of being sick or faint. And maybe you can help save them from a serious accident. So that's about all I have to talk about. I welcome any comments from anybody about what they would like to talk about. It's right now it's cool and humid, and it's a very nice time to exercise outside. If you are, one of the things I mentioned was exercise 3 or 4 times a week and improves the body's adaptive process, so you won't have to pay so close attention to these kinds of things. Exercise is the one thing that will probably save your life and provide you with a improved quality of life as we all age. And as we age, the incidence of succumbing to things like heat prostration increases. And don't underestimate that. You underestimate it to your detriment. Thank you for tuning in. If you're turning in, I hope you find this informative. Somewhat repetitious, agreed. And I do tend to go off on tangents from time to time. I do feel that what I'm talking about is information that people need to know. We all have the internet, or most of us do, I'm sure. So all this information is readily available. Whether the information out there applies to you or not is a separate issue. And I hope that if you look at that, you can tune in and drop me a line and say, listen, I'd like to hear about this. I appreciate your input. And thank you for tuning in. HH, Uh, he says Okinawa, and in the summer, athletes drink 4.5 liters a day. I wouldn't be surprised. Wouldn't be surprised at all. It's not excessive. It's not excessive. As long as it's water. Water and not something else. Again, thank you very much, and I hope to see you at the end of next month. Thanks for tuning in. If you're tuning in, if you see this, I appreciate your comments. Thank you very much. Good night. Bye-bye now.